Hello everyone, and welcome to SUNUP. I'm Lyndall Stout. We begin today with an update on wheat disease and treatment options for producers to consider. Here's our Extension wheat pathologist, Bob Hunger.
Well, compared to Walters, where there was a lot of stripe rust and septoria leaf blotch, up here at Stillwater, we're seeing much more powdery mildew.
Give us an example of what's in this plot.
Okay, this is my foliar fungicide trial, and if you look at it at the top, in the upper foliage, it just looks nice and pretty and green with the heads coming out and some anthers coming out of there. But if you look down low into some of the trial, into some of the plots, you'll see that there's a lot of powdery mildew down low, and that's been the case this whole last month up here around Stillwater and around much of the rest of the state as well. The powdery mildew down low, it has worked its way up to the leaf right underneath the flag here, and so it's sapping nutrients and water out of those leaves and not allowing the leaves to produce the nutrients for the plant and to fill the grain as that approaches more. That lower canopy will tend to die off a lot earlier since it has those powdery mildew infections. This would be a plot that had an early application of fungicide on it close to a month ago, and if you do the same thing here and pull back the upper leaves, you see very little powdery mildew down low on these plants. And that's one of the strategies for controlling powdery mildew. Of course, you can have resistant varieties, but chemicals will also control this. But this is a good example where that chemical needs to go on a lot earlier than it would for the rust to control the powdery mildew. The idea for the fungicides with this is that to control that powdery mildew down low, and I have some data that shows that those early infections with powdery mildew, especially if it gets up into the mid and upper canopy, can reduce yields significantly. And so to control those, it would have to be an early fungicide application. Now, I had mentioned previously that there are some changes in the labeling of the fungicides. There's a group of fungicides that can be put on up through flowering when flowering is over. Those can be put on through 10.5.4, which is the end of flowering. There's another group of fungicides that is related to flowering itself. They can only be put on through when flowering has occurred, and they have to be on before flowering really starts. And then there's another group that has a combination of those two things. Some of them have a date related to flowering, but they also have what's called a pre-harvest interval, meaning that they can go on up to, there has to be 30 days in some cases elapsed between the fungicide application and when you harvest. So the key point to that is to be sure to look closely at the label to make sure that you're using the fungicide in accordance with the label and not going off label in terms of an application.
Okay, Bob, thanks a lot. We'll see you again soon.
Earlier in the year, we talked about limit feeding cattle, and Dave, you've developed a system for total mixed rations. Can you kind of walk us through the specifics of it?
Yeah, so with a total mixed ration, what we're going to do is provide a ration that's got everything the animal needs every time it takes a bite. Mm-hmm. So it's different than last time we talked about limit grazing and then come back into the dry lot and feeding the animals a concentrate, or limiting access to hay and then feeding a concentrate. Here we're going to include the roughage in the ration. For example, what we talked about a month or so ago on SUNUP was feeding cows in our lactating our lactating cows are getting about 1.7% of their body weight, somewhere around 20 pounds per day.
Right.
If you gave them access to all they wanted of that ration, they'd eat 30 pounds. And so we are limit feeding the total mixed ration. And by doing so, this has a big portion of concentrate. In fact, it's about 60% corn and distiller's grains and other minerals and so on. The other about a third of it is ground hay or chopped hay. And so we're only feeding these cows about 6 pounds of hay a day, Whereas if you're just letting them have access to a round bale feeder, they'd eat 30 pounds of hay.
Right.
So we're really stretching our hay supply and trying to take advantage of a relatively inexpensive concentrate feed market. 7.5% of this ration is a liquid feed supplement that has vitamins and minerals in it. That's really nice ration conditioner. It makes the ration smell good, cuts down on the dust. So what we actually learned from our dairy farm is that right before we feed this, and it would be about 90% dry matter, only about 10% moisture. We pull up to the water hydrant with a little tractor and mixer wagon, and we add 30 to 35% more weight as water. And when that comes out of the feed wagon, it is not dusty. You know, the cattle cannot sort it.
Right.
They learn to toss their head and sort the grain to the bottom and eat it first. Well, with that much moisture in it, they really eliminates their opportunity to do that. So those are some of the specifics we have. That's just an example of a ration we're using right now. You know, we just encourage people to work with a nutritionist because here we're using dried distillers grains, corn, liquid supplement, and so on. Somebody else might have access to whole cottonseed, and it would be a beautiful addition to a ration like this. Other people might have access to inexpensive soybean hulls. And so you can come up with lots of different combinations that would work. You can't just start that 60% concentrate diet and limit their intake to 2% of their body weight overnight. You'd have some digestive upset problems if you did that. Probably with a concentrate diet like this and only giving the animals a portion of what they like to consume, it'd be maybe better to feed them twice a day. But to cut down on our labor, we've been able to get by and have had no problems just feeding them once a day in the morning. The feeding time, as I mentioned last time we talked about this, needs to be consistent. You need to feed it every day, and it really needs to be fed the same time every day.
Talk about kind of the nutritional needs of swapping, you know, some of the commodities in there. Say if someone had extra wheat available, would that happen?
Yes, and those can be worked in. That's where we encourage them to work with a nutritionist that has experience with these kind of things, because different commodities have different characteristics. So wheat is a really good example because it is very rapidly fermented in the rumen. Consequently, you can create founder if you feed too much wheat, process too fine, too rapidly. That's where folks ought to get in touch with a nutritionist that they have confidence in and just work with them to work out a program that fits their operation the best.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Dave Lalman. And for more information on that, go to our website, sunup.okstate.edu.
The first part of May is typically the start of the breeding season for spring calving herds all across the Southwest. I think that's a really good teachable moment as to what's the key factors that determine what percentage of our cow herd are cycling and have the opportunity to get bred early in this upcoming breeding season. The three factors that the folks at Kansas State University determined as they followed over a 7-year period of time, almost 3,200 cows, they came up with three key factors that determined whether those cows were cycling at the start of the breeding season. Number one, no great surprise to anybody that's been listening to the Cow-Calf Corner through the years, and that is body condition of the cow at calving time. In fact, what they determined was that for every one increase in body condition score, say from a 4 to a 5 or from a 5 to a 6, there was an increase in 18% in the percentage of cows cycling at the start of the breeding season. If we have cows that we can keep in good body condition, say in that 5 to 6 category, we can expect then 18 to 36% more of them to be cycling at the start of a breeding season as compared to those that are thinner in the body condition score 4 category. Number 2 on their list was age of the cow. Now that seems like a no-brainer because we know that 2-year-olds are slower to return to estrus cycles than will be mature cows in the herd. That's the reason why many cow herds are situated to where the replacement heifers are bred 3 to 4 weeks ahead of the mature cows to give them those extra days to have a better chance for a high percentage of them to be cycling at the start of the breeding season. And finally, on their list was the number of days between calving and the start of the breeding season. In other words, those cows that calved earlier in the calving season, say 70 days before the start of the breeding season, there was a considerable increase in the percentage of them that were cycling. The difference was about 7.5% for every 10 days. So I think if we keep these 3 factors in mind next year as we get our cow herd ready for the breeding season next May, let's keep in mind that if they're in good body condition at calving, that will help a lot. If those replacement heifers are bred ahead of the cow herd to give them those extra days, that will certainly be advantageous. And if we'll work towards having a narrow, confined, shortened breeding season and therefore a shortened calving season, we'll have a higher percentage of the cows that are out here at 60 to 70 days after calving before the start of the breeding season, again helping that percentage out quite a little bit. By having a large percentage of the cows cycling at the start of the breeding season, it'll help us in terms of having a large percentage of the calves coming early the following year, increases our reproduction capabilities in the cow herd, plus having bigger, heavier calves at weaning time. Hey, we look forward to visiting with you next week on SUNUP's Cow-Calf Corner.
The fires in western Oklahoma are pretty much under control now. So Derrell, in regards to cattle, what's the situation now for them and what's the plan going forward?
Well, obviously we've got a lot of producers who lost a tremendous amount of forage. They lost cattle. So there's just a lot of devastation for many families out there that they're dealing with right now. From a cattle standpoint, the cattle that survived, obviously we've got a lot of emergency feed needs. As well as a lot of lives to rebuild, really, in terms of the houses and the families that were affected by this.
So, like the broader picture, has there been any impacts on the broader market in regards to the fire?
Well, you know, from a cattle perspective, I really don't think so, and I don't expect to see that. The numbers are just not big enough to really cause an impact. However, hay markets are pretty tight. We're at the end of the winter. We're at the end of the season here when hay stocks are relatively low anyway, so we are certainly seeing some impacts on the forage markets.
Now, you mentioned drought. I mean, we've seen rain through a lot of part of the state, but there's still a drought situation. What do producers need to think about with that?
Well, and I think that's really the key right now, is that the fires happened as a result of the drought. The drought situation is getting bigger. It's very bad. Most of that area got a little bit of rain about 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago, but it wasn't enough to really alleviate the drought. All it did for a week or so was to slow down the rate of expansion of the severe drought areas. So we're at the point now in that shortgrass prairie country where forage really normally would be taken off to grow. In fact, it may try to grow with that little dab of rain that we got, but the drought is still there, and producers really need to get prepared for the next few weeks are going to be some critical decision times.
So they need a drought management plan, basically. So what should be in that plan?
Well, you know, I think what happens a lot of times in drought is we tend to sort of go into it without a plan. We kind of go into what I call the hunker down strategy, where we really don't make any plans, we don't make any changes. We just kind of wait and see. It might rain, you know, we can get by for another couple weeks, maybe a month. And then if you start into that and sort of get trapped in that mentality and you start buying hay or incurring additional expenses to get by, pretty soon you've dug a pretty deep hole financially, if not with respect to the cattle and the land. And so I think it's important to start at the other end and say, okay, if this thing stays bad, at the end I want to save the business, I want to protect my forage and land resources and hopefully preserve the herd, but really getting too hung up on the herd early on in the process, I think, is what can get people into trouble in terms of a longer term recovery for a number of ways. So it's important to have a plan, figure out when decisions have to be made, and then make those decisions at the appropriate time. It's too easy to get caught up in the emotions of this. It's a rather agonizing kind of a process, and so it's important to develop a plan that will help take some of that emotion out and help a producer make decisions when they need to be made.
Always got to be thinking ahead.
That's right.
All right, thanks, Derrell. Derrell Peel, Livestock Marketing Specialist at Oklahoma State University.
Kim Anderson, our crop marketing specialist, is here now. And Kim, the big stories this week, a 50-cent price increase and the crop tours. Let's start with the crop tours.
Well, the crop tours, looking at Oklahoma, it's not looking very good. You know, planted acres were at 4.3 million. The estimate from the tour is somewhere around 2.5 million acres harvested, and 58 to 63 million bushels of production. I've got it at 63. Now you can compare that to 2014 at 5.3 million acres planted, 2.8 million acres harvested, and 48 million bushel crops. So you just got to go back to 14 to get a smaller crop. The record crop in Oklahoma was in 1982. We planted 8 million acres in that year. We harvested 6.9 million and about 228 million bushels harvested. Kansas, they had about 2% higher planted acres this year than they did last year. So they'll be down, but not down as much. And Texas is, they've got lower production and even planted acres. So they'll be down, but not as much as Oklahoma.
What do the lower yields tell us about kernel quality?
Well, hopefully we'll have better kernel quality. One of the problems that may be out there right now is the lack of nitrogen. The elevator managers, I visited with them this past week, and they said that there was less nitrogen put out this year than in the past. But lower yields should be more nitrogen available for the kernels and maybe some relatively good protein. I think what's important this year is test weight and protein. We've got to have that.
Are the lower yield expectations then impacting that 50-cent price increase?
I think Oklahoma, lower hard red winter wheat production in the United States is having some impact, but I think the biggest impact's probably coming from in the Ukraine. They're having near record heat right now and some drought problems, and it goes on up into Russia. Those crops may not be as large as they had earlier been expected to be, and I think that's what the market's reacting to now. And you've also got drought and heat conditions down in Australia that's impacting that crop. That could lead to higher prices in Oklahoma.
With all this in mind, then, should producers forward contract for June delivery?
Well, right now you can forward contract for somewhere around $5.20, $5.30 a bushel. You know, I would, if I was a producer, I'd hate to miss that. I think I would come in and forward contract 10 or 20% of my crop with smaller yields, reduced yields. You got to be careful how much you do forward contract. And if we continue to lose the crop in Ukraine and Russia and Australia, then this price could continue to go on up and maybe get up to $5.50, $5.75, and you'd hate to miss that. But I would take some of it.
Okay, Kim, thanks a lot. We'll see you next week.
Hi, I'm Al Sutherland with your Mesonet Weather Report. May brings stormy weather and summer heat. For us humans, sunlight compounds summer's heat, while wind delivers some heat relief. For plants, sunlight and wind both drive plant water demand, measured in inches of evapotranspiration. April 30th gave us an example of wind driving water demand differences. At Woodward, water demand was 42 hundredths of an inch for the day. Oklahoma City East was 31 hundredths. McAllister was similar at 29 hundredths. Woodward had a wind speed of 21 miles per hour on April 30th at 4 p.m. Oklahoma City East was 10 and McAllister 8 miles per hour. The next day, on May 1st, Woodward had only minor cloud cover. Oklahoma City East and McAllister had heavier cloud cover and about half the sunlight. The water demand at Woodward was 38 hundredths of an inch. Water demand at Oklahoma City was 22 hundredths, and at McAllister only 18 hundredths of an inch. Keeping tabs on sunlight and wind will help you stay on top of plant water needs. Here's Gary with a check on April rain and the May outlooks.
Thanks, Alan. Good morning, everyone. Well, we've had a bit of rain over the last couple of weeks, so let's go straight to the new Drought Monitor map. Well, unfortunately, we've seen little change in that severity of the drought across the northwestern half to third of the state, especially across northwestern Oklahoma. The only change we have seen, in fact, is a bit of encroachment of that D4 exceptional drought into southwestern Oklahoma from Texas. So unfortunately things improved just a little bit, but not enough to change for the better. And down in southwestern Oklahoma, they got a little bit worse. And I can show you that next on the percentage of normal rainfall map for April. We see all those yellows and oranges and the darker oranges. Those are colors below normal for the month of April. And unfortunately, southwestern Oklahoma is now in the same boat as northwestern Oklahoma. So we can see southwestern Oklahoma missed out on the good rains, generally 20 to 40% of normal rainfall for the month of April. And that's going to make things worse whenever you're already dealing with deficits going back six months or so, all the way to October 2017. How about if we look forward to the month of May? The latest temperature outlook from the Climate Prediction Center shows increased odds of above normal temperatures not only across Oklahoma, but really across the entire United States, especially in the far western panhandle, at least as far as Oklahoma is concerned. Now the good news is, as far as precipitation is concerned, we see increased odds for above normal precipitation across most of Oklahoma, all except for the far western panhandle, but especially for southern Oklahoma, and maybe down there in the southwest where that drought's starting to intensify. It's spring, we need the rain, and we know it comes with bad things sometimes, so let it rain. We hope there's nothing too bad to go with it, but we definitely need to knock this drought out of here before we hit summer. That's it for this time. We'll see you next time on the Mesonet Weather Report.
Finally today, one 4-H'er's story of resilience and how her love of entomology and bugs is an important part of her journey. SUNUP's Curtis Hare takes us to Rogers County.
Like many students in Oklahoma, the teacher walkout left 4-H'er Shelby Counterman with some time to fill. Lucky for her, practicing piano and helping her mom, Meg, around the house has kept her busy. Oh, and taking care of her cockroaches.
These are a lot of my roaches I have. These are a lot of my favorites.
For a lot of us, these little critters make us go, blech. For Shelby, they make her eyes widen with intrigue.
And this one right here is probably my favorite of all of them. These guys are real fast. I started with 5 and now I have a lot more. They're fast though, that's like the one issue I have. This is an adult. Oh!
Cockroaches aren't just a hobby for Shelby. They're an obsession. One that started when she was only 18 months old.
The reason that she really fixated on cockroaches is we have a coordinated effort with the Conservation District to learn science hands-on, and I brought her with me one time and she saw them in one of his tanks and just fell in love. You know, I mean, it's been kind of an evolution, you know, over the last, almost 10 years. Had I even dreamed that it would have gotten to this? No. There's just no way that I would have thought that she would have been this passionate about them.
I have at least maybe 17 different species in here.
What do you like about cockroaches?
I like that each and one of them is special, and if we had no cockroaches, we would have a lot of dead bugs or dead animals around.
Shelby's obsession with insects has made her somewhat of a celebrity through the years. Local and national attention is great, but Shelby gets the most joy out of sharing her knowledge about bugs. She's known as Shelby the Bug Girl in Rogers County. Through her 4-H Citizen Project, Shelby teaches kids about the importance of insects.
I like to tell people that they should not be worried about most bugs because only a few are bad.
She's awesome. She's super involved. It's really incredible how she can teach others with what she does. And not only is it unique, but just her passion that she has for it and her passion to teach others is something that's really special.
Right here, the fat-tailed scorpion's the deadliest.
What's even more special about Shelby is the fact that she's even here.
When I was carrying her, they told me that she wasn't viable and just, you know, to go home and just wait for nature to take its course.
Although Meg successfully delivered Shelby, she faced a long road of medical issues.
Shelby was born with neurofibromatosis. It is a neurological condition and it can really manifest in so many different forms.
Doctors had her wear a helmet to protect her skull as an infant and wear a leg brace from age 18 months until last year.
Last year she spent a month in Shriners Hospital where she had her spine fused. So she's been through a lot.
I was in a lot of pain, and before I could barely breathe, because if your spine finally goes to 90, like it just like crushes your heart and lungs. And mine was at 80, so I had like problems talking.
A few weeks before her spinal surgery, doctors were running some tests and found another huge obstacle that Shelby and her family were going to have to overcome.
We've only publicly came out recently that Shelby has a brain tumor, and she's going to have it removed in June. So, and she's faced it with so much bravery.
Doctors say Shelby's tumor is benign and that removal will be the cure. With all the struggles she's gone through, it's never stopped her from doing what she loves.
She was teaching people about insects from her hospital bed, literally. Literally 2 weeks after her spinal fusion, she gave a presentation of 300 kids because she did not want them to miss out.
Shelby says one of the main reasons for her strength is the opportunity to show kids with health conditions that nothing can stop them from accomplishing something great, a sentiment she expressed at a pageant for girls with disabilities.
So I was on this amazing pageant for kids with disabilities, and I told them, a lot of the kids, that they should never let their disabilities hold them back, and they should always go for what they dream of.
Shelby's dream is to pursue a career in entomology and continue to expose people to the world of insects.
I just told them to behave.
He even scared agricultural reporters.
You behave. Don't be crawling up my arm. Holy goodness gracious!
In Rogers County, I'm Curtis Hare.
That'll do it for us this week. Remember, you can find us anytime at sunup.okstate.edu and also follow us on YouTube and social media. I'm Lyndall Stout. Have a great week, everyone. And remember, Oklahoma agriculture starts at sunup.